Vanguard! A warrior of the Empire's land assault troop, a veteran. He is too young to be described like this. Yet, this Dino Dragon is granted the title of Emperor Dragon, as he is known for his outstanding achievements that should require full battalions, but done single-handedly by this next-gen mecha dinosaur. This Emperor Dragon is Gaia Emperor. Emperor Dragon Gaia Emperor is a blast from the past, quite literally, as he combines the brand new gauge mechanic with his old school engorged multi-tech playstyle in quite an elegant package. As a true Emperor, Gaia empowers his troops and becomes more dominant as his enemies grows in strength. Gaia possesses a passive ability which allows him to empower any rearguard which has an equip gauge equipped to them with an additional 5k power. But if the opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, then that power increases to 10k power instead of 5k. This allows Gaia to empower his rearguards to achieve strong numbers behind the many attacks he can dish out. But that's not all, as when Gaia attacks, he can, for the cost of one counterblast, retire off one of his own rearguards, and then he gains the original power of that retired unit. But if the opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or higher, then he also absorbs the original critical as well. This allows Gaia to empower himself and swing with a dangerous strong Vanguard attack that can threaten with double critical. Gaia is a centerpiece of a brand new multi-tech strategy. He allows you to empower every single attack, allowing him to overcome defensive triggers, and on top of that, he can swing mostly with double critical, making it really hard for your opponent to no-guard the Vanguard attack, thus making the increased rearguard attacks that more impactful. Seen as Gaia as an Emperor, that means he has a lot of Dino Dragons to rule over, and what is an Emperor without its people? So let's see what supporting units makes Gaia Emperor so ferocious. First off, we have a duo of cards that allow Gaia to multi-tech beyond the Excel markers themselves, as we have Regiment Dragon Regio Dawn, and in the same breath we can say Full Speed Dragon Blue Sprint. These cards allow us to generate equip gauges on a rapid pace, which helps us to spread the power buff of Gaia. But when paired with a card like Gaia, they can activate their secondary effect, allowing us to achieve extra attacks, and with Gaia's power buff and the Excel Circle's power, it doesn't even matter what's called from underneath those gauges. But one card that we want to call from their abilities is Zelos Horn Dragon Dilofo Pyro. This card can be a great 24k beater on an Excel Circle when called from a gauge, but can potentially be 34k with Gaia, but on top of that, this card can be a great draw engine when used at the beginning of a field setup. Seeing if we have two units that need to be retired to achieve their multi-attack effect, we need some more mid-battle unit destruction, and what's better than one that is free, as we have Slicing Dragon Terrorizino. This card allows us to activate our Blue Sprints and Regio Dawns, but as an added bonus in return, this card gives us a draw for it and also retire off our opponent's rearguard. Another unit that allows us to retire our own units is Ravenous Dragon Mega Rex, this time as a grade 2, so we could even multi-attack in the early game, but that's without the power buff. However, this could also become a massive beater if we want to swing with an even stronger unit during our multi-attacks. The final unit that we are going to highlight is Ferocious Claw Dragon Lacerette Rex. This card can give us a nice strong booster with Gaia as a Vanguard, but more importantly, this is a nice draw engine that gives us some more value behind our own rearguard retires, and is also a nice counter against field control. As you might have noticed, this deck revolves around retiring our own units to achieve multi-attacks or to gain some kind of power up. Now at its center lies Gaia and the two targets Blue Sprint and Regio Dawn, but as seen as both have a hard once per turn restriction, means we only need 2 self-retires a turn. In Tachikaze, we got a couple of units that fill this role. We talked about 2 units so far, Terrorizino and Mega Rex, but I want to add one more, which is Death Rex. It's important to know when to resolve which of these self-retires. Gaia is handy as it's our Vanguard, so that means we have access to at least one self-retire at all times, but in comparison to the others, he is arguably the weakest and gives you the least value for your resources. Terrorizino and Mega Rex are costless and both give you a card draw in return, and you can pay a counterblast with Mega Rex to gain a lot more power when you would with Gaia. And then with Death Rex, it costs a soul, but with the correct setup can give you a massive beater that trumps Gaia. So use this information when setting up your board and picking your units to retire your multi-attackers. You might have noticed that the core cards of the deck doesn't really require resources. Our multi-attacks as well as some of our self-retires are using no resources, so this deck on normal operations can operate without resources. That said, we do have some cards that uses Counterblast and Soul, but these are more in the realm of quality of life skills as they make things easier for us, but definitely not mandatory. And in the case we need more Counterblast or Soul, we can maybe tag in a Sharp Thorn Dragon Pelican Spine for the extra fuel for our units. Our preferred triggers are criticals and draws. We don't need fronts as we can easily achieve massive numbers thanks to Gaia as a power buffer. So we want to add pressure behind those numbers with the potential of criticals. This deck also requires a lot of pieces in order to do its thing. And although we have inherent draw and cycle skills, 1 or 2 extra draws wouldn't hurt here and there. But don't go overboard as you might have some deck size issues with the added gauge generation from Tachikaze. Finally, we arrive to our Exo markers, and to be honest, both could work in this deck. Exo 1 allows us to generate a lot of powerful attacks, and together with our multi-attackers could reuse the same Exo marker over and over again for a potential of free attacks. But if you really need to draw, then Exo 2 is completely fine. Now let's take a look how a Gaia deck might be built with the information provided so far. This build has the entire Gaia core from the self-retires to the multi-attackers and the overall draw engine. But we see a new unit between the self-retires as we have Tyrant Defrex. This allows us to retire one of our units in exchange for a potential massive power boost. By combining multiple gauge makers, we can stack multiple gauges underneath a unit, giving us access to a massive Defrex attack. The other new card is the Grade 3 Searcher Prism Bird. This allows us to not only get to our Gaias, but also our self-retire Grade 3 rearguards. The strategy behind this deck is really simple. You want to spread your gauges to your different units to benefit from Gaia's power buff, which you can do with Blue Sprint, Regiodon, Dilophopyro, Megarex, and even Laceratorex. Then the other thing you want to do is utilize Blue Sprint and Regiodon to enable multi-attacks. You can activate them with Gaia, Defrex, Megarex, and Terra-Terrazino. Analyze your game to determine which of these enablers suit your current situation. Try to place your Blue Sprint and Regiodons on an Exo Circle. This way you can utilize the same Exo Circle twice without needing to call over units. And finally, use your draw engines to dig deeper through your deck to get access to your important combo pieces. Now, if we add some new grid ones to the list, we can give the deck a lot more control, not only over its resources, but also its gauges. Most of the list is identical to the previous list with only 2 major changes. First, we see a shift in the Grade 3s as we run way more Defrex than Terra-Terrazino, but we get back to that later. The other change that we see are the new additions in the Grade 1 lineup. One of those units is Sharp Thorn Dragon Polacan Spine. This card gives us more resources, allowing us to refund the cost of potentially Gaia, Defrex, or Megarex, and potentially gain resources when retired by Terra-Terrazino. But there is one more use for this Grade 1, and that lies in its ability to move its own gauges to another unit when it possesses 3 or more gauges. If we combine this with Defrex and Megarex, we can create 2 massive columns. We use the Defrex to retire a Polacan Spine. This results in the Defrex gaining 30k power, and after that, we move the 3 gauges to the Megarex. Then we can use the Megarex to retire one of our multi-attackers, and in the process, we pay 1 Counterblast to give the Megarex an additional 20k power on top of the 5 to 10k power from Gaia. This gives us access to not only multi-attack potential, but also massive numbers on our columns. And you might ask yourself, how am I supposed to create the gauges for this card? For that question, we run the other Grade 1 Light Blade Dragon Zandilopho. We can use Regiodon and Blue Sprint to create the gauges, but that's too slow and it leaves them vulnerable on the field. Zandilopho, however, is perfect for the job as he can create the gauges as early as turn 1, but on top of that, he also gives us more control over gauges in general, so he can help us set up for our multi-attackers. As he can move Gauge, Blue Sprints and Regiodons underneath the called multi-attacker, he also gives us more consistent access to Dilophopyro as we can put gauge copies also underneath our multi-attackers. So as far as this list goes, you have the same strategy, only now you have the added potential of the Polacan Spine combo and the gauge manipulation of Zandilopho. For our final list, I want to go back to the previous interaction of Tachikaze and mix that with the Gaia engine. So here we have mixed the Gaia engine with the destructive power card of Anger Blader. Anger Blader allows us to create gauges on the fly, but also as a potential multi-attack enabler. To support Anger Blader, we also added on Sweeper Acrocanto. This is a massive beater that keeps on growing turn after turn and at some point becomes unstoppable for your opponent. To support the Sweeper Acrocanto and the Anger Blader, we also added in once again the Zandilo Foes. He helps us to accelerate the gauges count on our sweepers so they meet the free gauge requirement, but Zandilo Foe can also still be used as a consistency engine to manipulate our multi-attackers with Regio Dawn and Blue Sprint. Of course, we don't just run Anger Blader as a potential turn-free OTK play, he gives us actually an interesting play with our gauge multi-attackers and Dilo Foe Pyro. Thanks to Anger Blader's first ability, we can put our units as gauge for our other units. This allows us to reuse the same Dilo Foe Pyro over and over again. We can call the Dilo Foe Pyro to the field, potentially use its on-place effect to get some extra value, but what we then can do is slot the Dilo Foe Pyro underneath one of our Blue Sprints or Regio Dawns and set up for a strong multi-attacker. And with Terra Terrazino, we can activate these units for free. And next turn, we can slot the same Dilo Foe Pyro underneath another one of those units. And while doing that, we also get some free retires. And together with Sweeper Acrocanto, we can have a lot of multi-tech potential with Anger Blader as a Vanguard unit. Gaia is an interesting new Vanguard that changes the way how Tachikaze approaches their equip gauges. We've seen them use them as a source of power, as a resource, and even as conditions. But now, they can also use them to enable multi-attacks that are hidden from their enemies. Use this video as a starting point to develop and build your own personal Vanguard deck, as there are many different strategies and many different options, and what we discussed in today's spotlights were just the bare bone basics to have an understanding what this new boss unit can bring to the table for its clan. If you're interested in more content like this deck spotlight, then check out this playlist here where we go over the many different VRs and their respective builds all over the spectrum of Vanguard, which also contains the other builds for VBT10, Phantom Dragon, Aeon. This video has been brought to you by our lovely patrons over at patreon.com/Vanguard Insider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can go to patreon.com/Vanguard Insider and become a patron today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one.